Exciting times ahead. Welcome back to Texonnect Voices. I'm super excited because today we have another amazing expert, and we're going to be basically trying to get a general sense of this whole AI thing that we've been doing by coming up to the governance level. Welcome Texonnect fans. This is Texonnect Voices once again. I'm sure most of you are still excited about the engagement with Dr. Boyson in the last episode on maritime and transportation. But today we have another phenomenal episode. I'm here engaging with Desmond Israel, who is a learned friend, so you know you're going to be learning a couple of things. Desmond Israel is a lawyer and technology expert with over 20 years of experience in cybersecurity and data privacy. He is the founder and lead consultant at Information Security Architects Ltd in Ghana, a lecturer at GIMPA Law School, and practices law with AGNOS Legal Company. He also serves as a training consultant with the National Banking College and a non-executive director at Zerone AnalytiQs Canada. Desmond is CISSP, and I'm going to let him explain all these acronyms because he has plenty. CIPM, CCT, and CC certified, and a former fellow of the Center for AI and Digital Policy, CAIDP, Washington, D.C. So you know this is no small fry. You know everything we're going to be talking about is legit. I have just explained the ethos to you. Welcome, Desmond.
Thank you, Papa.
Wonderful. So, Desmond, anything you want to add to your already impressive profile that the audience should know?
I'm a nice guy.
Well, there you go. He's a nice guy. Texonnect, we only invite nice guys. Today we're talking about AI in governance, and it's quite a broad topic, but it's also very high level, and everybody gets to appreciate the way AI is transforming the world, but it's like a nuclear bomb that has been popped up. How do you even govern this? How do you even stop the bomb after it's erupted? Obviously, your credentials tell us that you have had a chance to at least look at it from multiple sectors. Last time we were privileged to, in fact, in season 1, to engage Ajwa Kate, who is a lawyer with Cybersecurity Authority, and she gave us some perspectives, especially along how even Ghana is trying to figure out its way when it comes to governance and policies and stuff, especially in line with, you know, the US approach, which is different from the European approach and so forth and so on. So today we want to really get to the crux of this and understand how governance comes in here. And to kick us off, let me ask you this. Where does Africa currently stand in the conversation around AI governance? And what are some of the key gaps or opportunities for the continent to shape its own regulatory frameworks? And for the audience, just to ensure that we have a better understanding of why this is important, there are many that claim that AI is what is going to basically let us catch up, or is going to level the playing field, or it's that promised holy grail that is going to get us there. So, where does Africa currently stand in the conversation around AI governance? And what are some of the key gaps or opportunities for the continent to shape its own regulatory frameworks?
So to start with, I think first of all, we should be looking at a needs assessment. Like, what do we want AI for? The program AI, the project AI for the US, for China, and the rest has been very intentional. Very, very intentional. The US has spent over 25 years investing hardcore dollars into Stanford and MIT. They knew exactly where the LLMs were going, the large language modules. They knew what they want to do with it. There's a conversation now about, is it time to even pop the national security conversation where autonomous weapons should now be leashed out? So that should tell you they didn't wake up to this. And China started its investment 10 years ago. And now, even on the product face, ChatGPT, you know, Grok and the rest, we have one coming from China giving them a run for their money. So it's just to say,
cheaper the cost.
Cheaper the cost. And it's just to say that it's not really an issue of, oh, it's here, let's get going. We need a needs assessment. I've looked at a number of the policies. I think I'm in love with that from Rwanda, you know, where one of the key things I've been advocating for, even when I was with the Center for AI and Data Policy, is what I call the Afrocentric data. Because I played with ChatGPT a lot, like almost every single day. And even from the legal side, it regurgitates information that do not even exist. Like I ask it, what's the position on our law for XYZ? And then he tells me something that I know from an European perspective and has nothing to do with Ghana. And I say, this doesn't apply. Can you correct? Where did you get this information from? Now, when you keep playing around like that, you get to the point where you are convinced this is not for us. It's AI, it learns, I agree. I'm not naive to that. When I pass it information and now I ask it to reproduce content, I get scripts content. But then it leaves us with a question. Are we interested in the top layer, the large language module, which is Afrocentric, where we plug in to now discuss how we are applying it, healthcare, agriculture, education, cybersecurity, and the rest? Or we want to be at the downstream where we consume the chat GPTs and the rest? That is the conversation Africa needs to have. And that's why I said I love the Ugandan AI strategy, because it speaks of the data, the source itself. Where we are in Africa, continental-wise, we don't have anything unified. We don't have a single source of truth for our AI strategy. There's a lot of conversation going on around there. Like I said, on the regional level, there's one going on. Ghana has one. I've looked at it. I actually wrote a paper in my blog and also published it on SSRN for the purpose of policy critique and a recommendation. So, and I see some of the gaps in there, which, like I said, needs assessment would otherwise resolve some of those issues, because when we sit at the table, we are more convinced of what is out there. How do we quickly pick it and how do we run with it? But I'm convinced AI was never developed that way. Never. AI was consciously developed by nation states who were interested in a certain outcome. That's why in China today, people go to school elementary-wise from September. They are supposed to be learning AI. Which means from a national perspective, they know exactly where they are driving these to. So we don't have a binding continental regulation which will tell us what we are looking at. And I think it's also the case because, like I said, what's our needs assessment? You know, what guardrails do you want? Are you talking about human rights issue like the European Union side? Are you concerned about if Papa should have somebody in before a judge, for instance, applying for a bail, and Judge A decides to use an AI module to determine the bail application, and this person that Papa brought before the court is a first-time offender, but then the judge decides that AI says you don't deserve a bail, so you are not granted a bail. Is it okay? Are you okay with that as a country? Because that's a human rights issue, you know, and that's where you need to now begin to look at what do we want to do in terms of the governance. And I think it's more on a needs assessment base before we can get there. Of course, our data protection laws are also there, but they remain uneven.
Even the data protection laws were pretty much modeled after.
Exactly.
But yeah. You know, you've basically opened Pandora's box, because there's so many. I think what's happening is we're struggling to catch up so quickly. We're working on so many things at the same time, and we've not paused to ask what comes first and what follows. And I think the needs assessment, even the needs assessment in itself, is a Herculean task, because
Indeed.
there are so many facets of this that trying to find out what is needed, it's already even mind-blowing. And I'm sitting here right now, I'm just getting a headache, just thinking about what it is that you're basically asking. But so let's just say there's a lot of work that has to be done before we can even think about regulating. And I believe that, fortunately for us, that's what Texonnect was set up for. We just have too much work to do, you know.
Yeah.
And when I say what Texonnect was set up for, basically even just getting that conversation between all the parties. There are too many silos, too many things going on, too many disconnects, not enough communication, that it makes it difficult to even have this conversation that we're supposed to have. Let me jump to the next question before I get a brain stroke, because you have me now thinking all over the place, and this is crazy. How can African nations balance the urgent need for digital and AI innovation with the risks of adopting technologies that may be governed by foreign standards? And you've already raised about a number of risks just by what you said, right? So, but at the same time, there's that sense of urgency, right? And I see that there are a lot of people who are doing some amazing things. It's interesting when you talk about autonomous weaponry, and guys that are watching, honestly, you really have to watch all the episodes because they're so intertwined. I mean, Kendall was very adamant and very clear about the issue right now it's even a global issue where there's a discussion around autonomous weapons and the
There's a
danger and
paper
what
on
has
that.
happened,
Exactly.
right? And if you brush it off because your world or your reality of AI is ChatGPT, understand that it's much more extensive than that.
Yeah.
And right now it's about life and death, right? And choices.
And labor.
And labor, right? Exactly. So these are livelihoods we're talking about. And then Dr. Boyson also talks about the very proactive things that he's doing in terms of training and so forth and so on. But when Desmond puts it in this perspective and then ropes in the entire Africa, you realize that even with all the good work that he's doing, it's like a drop in the bucket. Yeah.
Indeed.
And so we need to be a lot more serious about a lot more people on the table, and we have to do it quick because other worlds are doing it or have done it, and if we don't regulate quickly, then we fall victim.
Indeed.
So this is crazy. You know, it's funny. This actor Ajitiana, who's a friend, asked me. Actually, we were on a forum, a brand conference, and he asked me. He said, "Papa, let me just ask you this question about AI." He says, "Isn't it dangerous if all the material that is there is European or foreign, that we are going to lose ourselves because it doesn't have enough African data?" And I said, well, an approach would be when we keep feeding it, which by the way, other people are warning against and say, hey, you're feeding the beast. But unfortunately, we need to feed the beast enough so that it reduces the bias and it recognizes that, you know, these Africans also exist. I remember the first time I put my name into AI,
they didn't know you.
Yeah, it said it was an error or something.
Now,
and then the last time I just popped something, I was like, whoa, okay, you really have learned about me. I should be scared, right? Yeah. So there's a lot of growth. Now you put in something, it says, do I give you a version in Pigeon or Tree? You know when we had that comfort that, hey, Tree was code, like, you know, they won't get it. Now they are getting it because AI can actually translate.
It's doing natural language processing.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And it's doing over big data. Millions of processing at the, within the second. I wish people are really into this for the knowledge so they understand where we are going.
It's crazy.
Because it's definitely not. It's not.
You know, I had this amazing conversation with Kojo. Kojo is he's with Meta. One of the big boys in Meta, and we're having a conversation, and basically I think we came to this conclusion that, you know, the people have to also modify their thinking. Like, we need to think and reason better. We need to be more critical thinkers if we can truly use this tool. Because if we can't think and we're just copy and paste, then we're dead in water. So there has to be we have to grow as well. To be able to even be in this new world that is coming up. But back to my question, how can African nations balance the urgent need for digital and AI innovation with the risks of adopting technologies that may be governed by foreign standards?
I think generally about technology, what we haven't done too well is adaptive regulations. Okay, and I think in the recent time with the fintech space, Bank of Ghana tried something like that with a sandbox. So yes, when it comes to policy and regulations, we also anticipate that kind of regulation where you throw technology into a sandbox and you throw all the risk at it and you see how it's going to impact people, and you begin to regenerate how the regulatory structure is supposed to be. What I have seen with Ghana is we pass the substantive law, agencies are set up, we give them mega funds so they implement. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that at all. Yes, in the substantive law, they are given different powers. For instance, they can go and get guidelines, they can pass LIs, they can pass directives and the rest. But I think that whilst you give the substantive law, we immediately need to make provision for them for the actual implementation, which is the procedural part of regulation. And that's where adaptive regulation comes in. Because if you give, say, for instance, an AI registry in Ghana the powers to pass directives that are binding on industry, what it means is as soon as they realize the harm, they can plug it, right? Which means they can also allow solutions to be rolled out because their regulatory regime is adaptive. The problem you have is regulators are afraid it will take them longer for the legislature to come through for them. They are always late in regulating technology. But who says we want to regulate technology? It has never been the case. And I've had these arguments on different tables. What we've sought to regulate is the harms that comes out of technology and the behavior of people who use the technology. That is why if someone should commit fraud through electronic means, you would say that is cyber fraud. But you'd see that fraud is already something we abhor. And so the law only makes room for that new technology to be captured as part of the regulations, and then you provide the necessary sanctions. Right. So I think that adaptive regulation is important, especially because the AI innovation tool is at the speed of light. Someone starts some EdTech today, tomorrow morning is almost like a dead product, because something else is coming up within the next 24 hours. So if we don't create, and it's borders back to the legislature and how they structure the laws, which is why I also think that the recent passage of our technology laws should bring a little bit more local mind into it. How does our industry operate? We are community centric. We are Ubuntu centric, right?
Yes, you're taking the words right out of my mouth.
We need to align our regulations towards that journey, so it becomes easier for us to go on. And then another issue that I noted, which is also dear to me, is the local capacity. Now, I had a few engineers who were like, "Oh, you guys are always about local capacity. You don't have anything," and I'm like, "That's exactly the problem. That mindset is the problem. That everything would have to come from out there. That's the problem." Because like you just said, the likes of Kojo, we met her. And I've seen people, even in my policy work, I've seen Ghanaians and Africans pushing the policy that White House is reading. And I'm saying these are people that are needed in the continent. So local capacity, from the regulatory, from the engineering, from the sales, from the investment, we need to start having that conversation African-wide. Because I agree, it's also very expensive to do it. But Ubuntu, if we should come together in unity and strength, respect for each other, we likely can have that Afrocentric data collection start. We can likely have the African AI regulation start. We can have an African-based AI research investment started. I don't think Dangote is non-African, right? But have we ever thought that his investment could do something?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. That's where I look at it from. The adaptive regulations, the local capacity, there could be other things to talk about, but I think they are ancillary to the bigger conversation. If we have local capacity, which includes how we're going to invest, how we're going to engineer, how we're going to regulate, and then we have an adaptive regulation, we can balance that innovation and the regulation for the start.
It's interesting you're saying this. I'm working with some stakeholders on this. We're working on the 5-year strategy for the startup space, right? And one thing that I've been very clear about in my voice is that local contextualization. Yeah. It's also part of the reason Texonnect was set up, like I said, to be. Awesome. We keep saying, who looks out for government, right? We're supposed to be that guys, I remember one of the DGs, one of the others said, "Hey, we've just been given this job. We don't have the capacity." I said, "That's why we're here, to get you the sharpest guys to support you, because it's our country, it's our continent. It's for us, right?" And it's important because whether we like it or not, and I think it was either Tony Elumale or one of these billionaires who said, "Look, if I'm a billionaire out there and my people are suffering here,
what's the use?"
Exactly. So we need to really have the right perspective and really think through these things. And you've hit the nail on the head with a number of issues. So we definitely have to all be involved in ensuring that these regulations are done and done well, and that they work well. And where they don't work, we need to raise the alarms very quickly. Let me jump on to my next question, which is what lessons can African policymakers learn from the EU AI Act or other global frameworks when crafting context-relevant, people-centered AI regulation? I'm not saying we should take it, copy
and paste.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I'm saying, what are the lessons or what are the stumbling blocks that they hit that we need to make sure we avoid? Because we have that opportunity to catch up and learn from others.
Yeah. So 3 things which we can expand in the conversation. Europe has adopted a Riksdag regulation, right? So depends on the harm, the extent of the harm the AI is going to cause. Certain things must be done. We can discuss that. Then there's a human rights centric aspect part of it. Before it even became a regulation, from a policy perspective, we used to call it human in the loop. Where we made this argument that you can't leave AI as an autonomous system without a moral agency. When harm is caused, who do we go after? So you need to create AI systems that allow a human-centered, interaction or intervention, if you like.
Even if it's a checklist or
exactly. I mean, you're sending an autonomous weapon into a disputed zone. So let's say Baku, and then you say that okay, the warring factions look like this and they wear this. So you feed that data set to AI and tell AI, when you get there, right, and we trigger, kill these people.
Yeah.
What happens if innocent people look like what you describe to AI? And that's where we argued for the human-centered,
The interesting thing is not even if innocent people look. I hear that there are cases where, because of one that actually fit the profile, everybody else was cleared, even though everybody else was like a 9.
Yeah, and this is not me trying to get into geopolitics, but I don't know if you saw the videos from Gaza where Israeli drones shot these guys. Yeah, I shot them right there, and that's an autonomous fight, and these people were not harmed. So for me, who looked at that video, I asked myself questions, but these are not combatants. Why are we shooting them? But that's the program we have. That's the solution to that warfare, and it's unfortunate, but that's something we need to look at. And I think because we're trying to align with what the best practice has been, I think the human-centered loop is something that we want to look at. And then they also come up with the public registries, which is something that I think would help us. Public registries in terms of who is developing AI, who is deploying AI, who is using AI. We need a registry for this because so we can track.
It's like an expansion of what the CSE people are doing. They are doing, whoever claims to be a CSA expert, a
cybersecurity expert, come to us. Yes,
but this is going beyond that.
Exactly. So they are modeling around data processors and data controllers, similar to the data processing register. Exactly. But when you look at take it back to the risk conversation, what did they do? They try to categorize the risks. So the critical, low, high, and to the extent that it could even cause life. And then based on that, they anticipate that you put in certain guardrails like what they call impact assessments, the responsibility that comes with it, accountability, explainability, the black box syndrome. All these things are modeled around it. So I think that these 3 things from the European side is something that I want to look at. We would model more around the European side because, first of all, we are also human rights centric. Even our data protection is human rights centric. European data protection is human rights centric, the GDPR. The Americans are more, and I spent a bit of time with them, so I pretty much understand them. These guys are more of commercial in nature. It's transaction based.
If you follow their models, the capitalist model,
you're going to get in trouble.
Especially when you're a communal market.
And we don't have the kind of business muscle that they have. Industry controls a lot of things out there, so it's not something you want to.
Over here, everything. If government.
Yeah, exactly. So you need to cut government some slack, so government would be able to then manage the bigger picture. The bigger picture. So I think that those are really like very key things we can learn from them. Are there any impact? Yes. It could stifle innovation. It's a very stringent regulatory regime, and which is why I said that. I mean, you alluded to that. We would need to model rather than copy. So what's working for them and how is it going to work in our system? I'm thinking that the African thinking is superior. It needs to be brought into the way we work, the way we do things. And before we will realize some value out of some of these things. So there are lessons to be learned from there. Absolutely.
Our approach or our thinking in Texonnect is that if we can create solutions that are African contextual, not only can we solve our problems and solve our problems better, but those solutions then will become innovations to the other markets because they never had to create them, and now they'll find other uses for them. There are a lot of applications like that, and so we actually make the world better by first serving our people. But so let's go to the big brother, AU and ECOWAS. Right? How can regional bodies like AU or ECOWAS lead in setting a continental vision for AI governance that protects African data sovereignty and fosters innovation?
Yeah. So you earlier on were talking about feeding AI with the data, and then we are still worried. Okay, how much are we giving to these monsters? people have said that the European Union will win because they also have some economic muscle to play with. And I said that, yes, I agree and I totally, align with that. But why do you think Africa do not have any leverage at all? Why? There are solutions that are heavily based on data streamed from Africa. You can take us out of the picture. You might want to go with the divide and conquer if it's country based. Ghana is too small for Facebook or whatever. But if you have an Africa Data Commons, which is managed by the AU, where we go and do the negotiation from a continental level, these dudes are going to wake up.
Yeah, can't touch it.
You can't touch it. I mean, and that is what the European Union did. They could deal with Germany. They could deal with the UK. But when it became a unified force, even Italy, and no disrespect to them, but even Italy's regulator can go after Meta. Because they form part of the bigger AU body, which is trying to protect the big picture. So I think the first thing we need to do is, because we're also in an era of extractive data, we are focusing on gold and cocoa, to build our economy, but we are missing the other part. Extractive data is happening now. People are harvesting data that
and human resource,
which is getting out there. So I think that an Africa Data Commons will help us to start with, because they are the regional body. They can get the best eye view picture of the conversation. Anticipate data sharing protocols as well. Fortunately for me, my first paper after my LLM, I actually wrote a paper on cross-border data transfers and AI regulations, And I argue that the more you infuse AI into cross-border data transfers, regulations will become useless. Yes, and part of my argument in my proposal was looking at data sharing protocols. And I even wrote these papers as a global paper, so I was not really focused on just Africa. But now we are at the point where Africa needs to look at data sharing protocols, structured, and I think that from a trade perspective, which is where the world likes the conversation most, we should be empowering the Africa Continental Free Trade, the digital trade protocol, and see how we can build on the data sharing protocol, create value on the data sharing protocol, so it becomes an incentive why people will want to invest into mainstream AI modules and why they will also want to respect regulations. Because if we don't have anything to leech them on, we're not going to get
hopefully
anywhere.
the fintech guys can learn a lot from
they
that.
They can learn a lot from that, And you mentioned the baseline norms. So baseline norms, definitely I agree with. I don't think I want to flog that horse again. Baseline norms, tell us, everybody, this is where we want to go. Module around it. It's just like the Unicitra. They have these, what they call the electronic transactions law. And it's a module. And our Electronic Transactions Act was
2008.
Was modeled around that, which is like a 1998 model. And to date, it serves a lot of purpose. I wrote a paper where I said that it's actually our first AI regulatory regime. And I'm hoping that people who are going to sit down to discuss our AI regulation will go back to that law.
And create
some benchmarks from there. I wrote extensively about that, and it's published as well. So I totally agree with baseline norms, in addition to what I've said already.
Interesting. Now, with limited infrastructure like we're known to have and resources in many African countries, what practical steps can be taken to ensure AI deployment is ethical, inclusive, and does not exacerbate existing inequalities? I don't know if you've heard about the UNESCO framework when it comes to AI. That was a very interesting framework, and inclusion is one key part of it. So, how do we ensure it's ethical, inclusive, and does not exacerbate existing inequalities?
Right. So that was actually a question I've also been battling with. So I actually put down some pointers because it interests me. I don't know. I might also go back and start looking at how to present that in a paper form. But I think the first thing I've mentioned already, but the investment, right? We need to invest into the digital infrastructure.
Absolutely.
You're talking about inclusion. How do you include people into something you don't own? Financial inclusion is working for us now because we developed mobile money transfer.
Absolutely.
The West is actually struggling to do it the way we did it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's one of my biggest fights, I shouldn't say fights, but I raise up in this startup thing that we're working on, because I keep reminding us that we need to stop looking at just big tickets. So it looks like we're doing this, but we keep still having that Silicon Valley mindset. And we're just thinking big ticket items. And we're forgetting that there's a huge mass of people who just need a little and are actually holding the entire economy. You know what I mean? It's not the big ticket items, it's the little ones. So you're right. I mean, we need to change the way we do inclusion so that they are all involved and are all at the table.
So I think that the first thing is, if we have a piece of the pie, even if it's 1% of the global pie, then we can create our inclusion based on that. You own an African module, right? There's a Llama somewhere, there's a Claude somewhere, you own maybe an Afro AI somewhere. And so you build the inclusion around that. You try to infuse your ethical consideration in there. I keep going back to Ubuntu, but another thing
it's interesting you keep saying Ubuntu, and I don't know if you're aware of this, but I'm the first and only, well, not the first, but the only one that successfully was able to deploy Ubuntu at the whole office level in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And they fought me, and but it's interesting and it's crazy that model didn't even because here is that Ubuntu was the first thing I saw that Africa made a number of flavors that were African. And I thought that was like a clear sign for us to use that to adopt all the solutions that we do. And yet it seems like it's a no-brainer. And if we thought that was an easy thing for us, how do we even begin? I mean, I think we need some serious ideological reshaping.
I totally agree with you. Sometimes when we sit at the table like this, we don't want to stretch the ideological conversation too much, because it also creates a problem where people refuse to listen because they feel you are all about ideological thinking. But I think that is exactly what the problem is. How much do you want recognition for your own? How much of it do you want? So we have to support the community-centric AI project, and I keep going back to Ubuntu because that's exactly the module. That's how it was done. We need to now take, how many African experts do we have? China is already, paying people to repatriate from the US to come to China because they know they will come with a skill. How much investment do we want to make around that region, short-term, long-term, incentive-based investments? How do we want to cycle around? Somebody's not going to leave Google and come to work for government, and then there's a change of government, and then that project comes to a halt. It's not going to happen, right? Nobody's going to move to Burkina Faso and try to build something around that module, and they can anticipate the stability of the place. It's not going to happen. These are the real issues.
So and not to sound political, but what I'm hearing you say is, because Ghana's praised the Lord for our peace, our democracy, but even with this democracy that we've enjoyed and this peace we've enjoyed for so long, we still have a problem with a quick switching. And so it sounds to me like, and I'm going to be brave enough to say this, it sounds to me like we have to call a conversation, say, hey, different parties come to the table.
Yes.
Can we agree on an agenda that does not change regardless of which party or whatever changes?
And that's how
so that everybody can be a part of the conversation and know that it's long term.
Listen, anything that has been consistent and working for us is because we refuse to allow politics to touch it.
But touching some dangerous waters. I like it.
Yeah, and that's why we where we are. Like, pull the documents out. Sometimes I tell people, you have no idea how much I look for government documents and read them. So sometimes when you begin to speak and people wonder, where has it been all these while? But that's what it is. You need to know why the system is not working. We've fallen for technology colonialism. We're falling for data colonialism. We're going to fall for regulatory colonialism because of AI. We are going to be forced to swallow strategies and policies which are working for people who have money to support those strategies and policies. And we don't have money. We have talent.
Lots of talent.
And we need to build policy around the talent. You don't need to build policy.
You watch our talents leave every day.
Because we want the World Bank to fund, our own policy. There's no way this is ever going to work with me. I'm not fighting anybody. I'm so passionate about it. How is it that a country's own policy direction must be funded by a development partner?
You're talking some hard truths. You know, it's funny. I don't know if you know Kwame Opon.
I do. Very good.
Ghana as
yeah,
well.
Solid
and
guy.
He also has that same, you know. I think there are a couple of passionate guys, and we just need to put them all together. And it's funny, the one consistent thing that is inconsistent with a lot of people, but is a consistent with you, these very passionate guys. And that is, you know, everybody else is asking who's going to fund it. You guys are saying, let's just do the work.
Just do it.
Just do the work, right?
Yeah.
And you figure out the rest. And that is the only way that it works, because whoever is funding is the one that determines where it's going.
What's going to go in?
So we cannot continue.
And I look at the selection criteria for even the people that develop the policy, and I'm like, big ups to you. You've done this for decades. But I know something about my environment you don't. Which is why when they do needs assessment, they want us to tell them our problems.
Hard truths, man. Hard truths.
You know, but you're saying that we can't tell ourselves our problems and fix it. Europe will not do that. China will not do that. The Americans will not do that. Why do we do that in Africa? And an African will tell the guest his problems, so the guest will fix it. And tell me which one has worked. Tell me.
How do you fix the problem if you don't know the root cause of the problem? And how do you know the root cause of the problem if you don't know the history?
The history, you know. And then a few more things. We need to train our regulators and our devs in these whole, you know, cycle of the AI development, deployment, the ownership of it. I think that we have these module in our cybersecurity strategy about building capacity, and we want to use public-private partnership, academia, and the rest. It's something that I think that AI is early in the day for us, and AI should take advantage of that. Now, not to sell GIMPA, but I teach at GIMPA, and I had a dean who, for the first time ever, allowed a law school to teach law and tech. Yes, so I teach a class.
I think this guy also told me he's either a professor with tech or data or AI or something. Max, he's with Max FM.
Oh,
what's his name? He's Clyde. Clyde is one of our members of Texonnect.
Oh, right.
Solid guy.
Yeah, I was on Clyde's show before I went back to the States.
Okay. Solid guy.
Awesome guy.
So he's one of our Texonnect members. He's been also fighting the course with us. Yeah. And I also used to teach at GIMPA as well. I did the sandwich programs, leadership and communication.
Oh, good. Good. I mean, so we've tried to fuse this into their studies. We are doing generative AI in practice, generative AI and research, trying to let them understand the ethical concerns, you know, the fact that yes, you can use AI, but these are some of the things you need to consider so you fit within the academia. I'm sure this year or the next, we might be looking at the bigger picture where we developed a university-wide documentation for that. I've heard it from the grapevine, so this is not like an official, thing. But I anticipate the day comes so that some of us can be part of the conversation. Maybe develop a module that other universities will want to look at. So yeah, that helps with the training. You want to include marginalized voices, but how are you going to do that inclusion? That's why we need an Afrocentric data, right? The statistics from the hinterlands, their concerns, the folklore, that thing that is handed over one voice to the other. How do we capture these things and hold them? Someone told me that the best history books you get about Ghana were written by Europeans, and I said that don't get hurt. They write, we don't.
We speak. We tell stories.
We tell stories, and that is why. Even in the preparation of your regulations and all that, you should create room for that community interaction, which will form part of your development. You are throwing away an identity which makes you unique.
There's a chief friend of mine, I need to call him. We were having a cybersecurity workshop of some sort at UPSA, and he was the guest speaker.
Okay.
And you should hear a chief talk about cybersecurity from the perspective of a chief. It's beautiful. Beautiful.
I like that.
Beautiful.
Yeah, so that's it. Yeah. That's it. I mean, those are key things we look at. Infrastructure investment, the support for community-centered AI projects, We try to look at the training that we bring to the table, both dev all the way to regulators. And of course, the final one is how do we include the marginalized voices, which is why I'm trying to talk about folklore, the real tradition, the fact that what we move with is more of the voice than writing. So how do we, if you like, reduce these voices into tangibles, right? Is our AI going to be heavily audible based so that our mothers can talk and hear it back? Do we want to go voice recognition immediately? Is our natural language processing going to focus more on voice to text? What do we want?
What do we want? How we doing? It's been super exciting, but our time is up, and I know you want more, so you know what? We're going to do a part 2. Just stay tuned. It will follow right after this.
All right, everybody, buckle up, because this time on the deep dive, we're heading straight into the world of African tech.
And we're diving deep.
Yeah, no kidding. Forget your average app launch. This is about Texonnect, and let me tell you, it's a whole different ball game.
It's big, really making waves.
That's what caught our attention, right?
Tech Connectors, we are back, and we're back with Desmond Israel, and it was explosive in the part 1. We're back to the part 2, and we just have to get back to this. Now, we zoned in on Africa in the first one. Now we want to look globally. What does this whole governance thing mean? Where do we fit in the big picture, and where do we go from here? Desmond, welcome back.
Thank you, Papa.
Thank you. Awesome. So, how do the European Union's AI Act and the emerging U.S. regulatory approaches differ in their vision for ethical AI governance, and what might these differences mean for global tech companies?
Okay, that's a loaded question, but very relevant. So first of all, ready?
No. Stop.
All right, so let's just break them down. We look at the EU and then the US approach, and I'll try to touch on the implications. But on the EU side, they are more focused on a risk-based conversation. Let's say they are preemptive in nature, but then the US side is more pro-innovation. So US wants the product out. They are interested in the functionality. Bring it out. We want to see what we can do with it. The European Union side is on the safety side of things. No, don't bring it out. You need to put these guardrails in before it comes out. So one is proactive, and the other is reactive.
The different perspective I had, and I just want to find a way to align both of them out, because we engaged Adra earlier on. She was saying that the EU, they were looking at the existing laws and seeing how, like you said, the human factor were breaking them, and they will address it as they violate the existing laws. Whereas the US side felt like we're going to build the laws fresh as we go along. Is that...
Okay, so that's more looks at the incoming regulatory structure.
Okay, exactly.
But you also need to look at what is there now. What are they doing now? The US side of things is pretty much there's no federal law for that. So they are looking at the sectorial side of things. So for instance, for the foreign trade, the Federal Trade Commission, which deals with consumer protection. If you can actually bring them on board to address issues in AI that violates consumer protection. And I was part of a team that filed an administrative lawsuit against OpenAI for the harms that ChatGPT was causing. And I've told people that I've seen a lot of improvements in ChatGPT, which were part of the complaints we raised before the FTC in the United States.
A round of applause for Desmond. He's making things happen for you.
And I was with the Center for AI and Digital Policy. I mean, these documents are online. You can reference them and you see the researchers who actually did the work for those suits. And so that's where it comes in. You can have something like the SEC, the Securities Exchange, also addressing AI if it has the impact on securities and exchange. So they are more sectorial.
Are you saying, and this is me totally going off tangent, but are you saying that SEC could get to a point where it could accuse AI of insider trading?
Yes.
Really?
Yes. That's
freaky stuff.
That's why we had a conversation about the moral agency. Are you going to say, this is autonomously done, so if you are harmed, there is no remedy for you? The courts, the law doesn't, perceive harm that way. Every harm must be remedied. You know, and that's why I'd say that you want to look at what is exactly on the ground in terms of regulatory regime. You know, what is happening? What are we doing with the regulations? Clearview, they were doing web scraping of data from LinkedIn, but they were using AI, right, to do a little bit of modeling, and then they were sued. They were sued in state courts. There's no omnibus AI law in the US, but they were sued in state courts. You know, I've forgotten the gentleman's name, but he's an Hispanic. He had a problem with promotion from the education, what do you call the education ministry in one of the states. And he's done his work. He was due for promotion, and AI was used in making a determination, and he lost the promotion. And he said, no. All my documents shows that I've been doing so well. Why did AI do this to me? So he sued. Algorithmic audit showed that the AI data was biased because it presumed Hispanics to not be efficient when it comes to the role that he was going to be promoted to.
This is good intel. I mean, I wish CK was here, because CK, I mean, we had an engagement, and his whole thing was about the bias.
The bias exists.
Yeah.
The bias exists, you know. And so they are looking sectorial. They are also looking at guideline regimes. So they don't have a mandatory regulatory regime. So for instance, you follow the National Institute for Standards and Technology in the United States. So you know about NIST 800 and all that. They have the NIST AI RMF, which is the risk management framework for AI. I mean, it's not a law, but if you follow it, it's going to give you the best practice. That's the US module. That's how the US is approaching this whole conversation. And I'm telling you that it's also because industry has a rather strong hold in the US. They are innovation first. Once you begin to look at the geostature of these countries, you would appreciate why things go the way they go. You know, like somebody asking me about why they would not deregularize guns. And I said, take it easy. I don't know how much you know about US history, but that country was redeemed by militants, militia, farmers who had guns, who were able to fight the redcoats away, you know. So it is not in today's world that you tell them to put the guns away. In their mind, if that time ever comes again, the entire country can go to war, you know. So
some of them even by themselves volunteer to even protect the borders.
Yes, protect the borders and all that. Exactly. I mean, so yeah, that's it. And so they are industry-led and self-regulatory in nature. And then the EU side, I can conveniently say that they have the omnibus, right, law, and they are looking more of a proactive nature of things, safety first kind of approach. What is unique about them is the kind of penalty and fines. In the AI law, they are looking at 7% of your global turnover. In the GDPR, which is the privacy law, they were looking at 4% of your global turnover if you violate. And they've made it extraterritorial. So long as it impacts European Union, the law comes after you. You know, so there's a pushback. There's actually a global pushback that they will stifle innovation. They will make it difficult for SMEs to grow, because it looks like those who will be able to muzzle up with them will be the Googles and the Metas and the rest. So that's also a conversation that's ongoing. But what's the implication to all of us? First challenge is this whole idea about dual regulation. Now, I have to determine if my product is going to hit European Union, I need to follow a certain standard. If it's going to hit the US, I need to follow a certain standard. If it's going to do both, I need to follow a certain standard. I think best practice has been that you go for the most stricter, and then you use it to set your baselines. But yeah, it's still a problem. It's going to cost people to do that. And I don't know how we're going to navigate
and
that.
And if our standards and our gun export promotion agency and all those want to really help us, then they really need to understand to help beef us up when we're going.
On where we're going with this, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Wow. Maybe the last note will be the possibility of AI forum shopping.
Okay.
Yeah. Developers and investors will look at, where do I go? Where are the restrictions less? And then we're going to go. So those are implications that will definitely affect the big picture. Yeah.
Now, with the EU set to implement its AI Act in 2025, how prepared are AI developers and enterprises to comply, and what are some practical challenges they might face during implementation?
So let's talk about the readiness. I don't think non-EU firms and SMEs are ready. It's one of the most expensive compliance ventures to comply. GDPR gave the run for the money, but the EU AI Act is a monster for compliance. And I'm not talking compliance for the smaller business, they would even struggle. But I'm talking compliance at the level of the Google, the AWS, the Facebooks, and the rest. It's a big deal. It's a big deal. So and in as much as the EU is expecting a 10 key, I think it's going to take time for us to get to the point where they themselves will feel like compliance is good. I've seen that they've been throwing some sanctions at some few companies. I need to check my facts on specific companies, but I'd read a few where I think they've started trying to bite, because of course they want to show the world that
We're serious.
We're serious, exactly. So that's one of the biggest. I think the second one is also about enterprise and being able to do what I would call the AI portfolio audit. You now need to look at your AI portfolio, which product can go where, and then you need to now match them to the risk structures of the EU AI Act. Because under the EU AI Act, you're supposed to, provide certain leverage of different compliance requirements depending on the risk level of your AI product. So it means that the small startup guy at this stage will need to invest in AI audits so he can determine his risk portfolio on the various AI products and where they go. Is it consumer reporting? If it's consumer reporting, is it high risk, low risk, medium risk, right? If it's medium risk, what does it mean under the EU law? Do you have to do impact assessment? If you don't need impact assessment, do you have to do accountability reporting? Do you have to file at the public registry for the product? These things are the practical issues that we are going to be faced with, and I think that we also get to a point where we need to do the risk documentation for AI, just like we are doing for cybersecurity. For people who practice cybersecurity, I'm sure they will agree with me that it's an onerous tax, because even the risk keeps evolving, and now you're dealing with AI with all the octopus harms that it has, dealing with data protection, dealing with biases, dealing with human-centered nature of it, dealing with the black box syndrome, explainability and all that, AI algorithmic accountability and all. These are all things that are real. They are not conjecture. These are things you actually have to do. And if you've looked at the EU AI Act, you are more likely to believe that there's a lot of work coming. I actually said that, and I think I did that at the last ISACA conference, where I said that the new governance role would be the AI governance role, where you need to have AI ethicists, AI compliance gurus to fill that gap for you, because your business is going to create AI is going to create those problems in your business in as much as it's going to create value for your business. And just the way we deal with all manner of compliance, we would need to have a room to deal with AI compliance, for that nature. And I think the last two things I would probably put on is still transparency would be a conversation. The whole issue about the black box. Nobody's buying that. Nobody. I've not seen any policy paper that is agreeing to the black box. Yes, it exists. But every policy paper is saying, fix it. Find a way to tell us why AI does what it does. Because we don't want a situation where there's a harm, and then the AI deployed, the developer or the one that deployed the AI or the owner will tell us that, well, we don't know how it did what it did. There has to be some reason behind everything.
We can't wait for somebody to suffer first.
Yeah, and then the last bit a lot of people haven't looked at, there will be issues with supply chain dependency. Because the law, that EU law, it follows, it cascades. So it means that if I gave you a module, that module must comply. Based on my module, you are deploying a product, your product must comply. So there's a cascading effect to the supply chain as well.
Wow, this is crazy. I hope it doesn't create, rather than being efficient, create bureaucracies that we're not looking for. But given the absence of a unified AI regulatory framework in the US, how are companies currently navigating AI compliance, and what risks does regulatory gap pose?
Yeah. So the White House, I think 2023, 2023, either is the early part of 2023 or the later part of 2022, they adopted the AI Bill of Rights. Okay, now that Bill of Rights was a voluntary framework from the executive, more like its commitment towards compliance, and ensuring that AI harms are reduced in the United States. And I think that gave them room to look at things. So now, like I mentioned earlier, voluntary frameworks are being adopted. In the healthcare sector, people are modeling around the HIPAA, the Health Information Portability Act, where in our case that would be special personal data. If AI is going to impact that kind of data, you need to beef up the kind of compliance requirements and controls that you put in place. So that's one way that they are looking at it. And so it's still sectorial. On the side of the frameworks, they're following the NIST. I mentioned that the AI-RMF earlier. They're also following the OECD principles. You mentioned UNESCO. They do follow the UNESCO as well. And now there's been an industry drive towards what you call internal ethical boards. So internally, it's not regulatorily required, but internally they are developing or they are setting up AI ethics boards, just like the way you have IT steering committees. And these boards are now advising companies at a high level that, okay, these are deployment, which is maybe a credit rating solution or a healthcare, maybe cancer detection app or whatever it is that we are deploying. These are the potential impact that it's going to have. And the courts have been very busy. The courts and the regulatory agencies have been very busy. So there's a number of decisions that would guide these internal boards to determine, okay, the courts have ruled this way. It means we can't do this. Yeah. Exactly. And that's it. So the risk on the gaps, definitely because is structured in a checkered manner and it's not unified, we would have regulatory uncertainties. Definitely. We won't be sure. In Missouri, we don't know what the regime would be and what the courts will say and what the administrative bodies will say. In California, we are not too sure. California will give you the highest standards. In Michigan, we don't know what they're going to do. Even at the federal level, we don't have any law for that. So it pretty much going to create that, regulatory uncertainty for them. And if you have a business in the United States, whilst you're thinking that, well, I'm going to spend less or relatively less on compliance, you're going to battle more in there if you are going to work within more than one state, because you would have to deal with regulatory uncertainty. And then the algorithmic harm is still there. Consumer mistrust would be a problem because now people are wondering, what are you doing with my data? What are you doing with my data? I remember taking my class through one of these sessions where I explained to them how somebody used Gen AI to take an original photograph of an artist who had like a photo studio and has taken time to take these shots, and they reproduce it and put it out there. She sued in a court in Luxembourg, and I think at the court of first instance she lost, and then she appealed and she won. So the issues are there.
It's crazy. I found out there's this tool that allows me to take a picture, just a regular picture of anybody, you, and with a sample voice of the person, can produce a video where the person is speaking, and it's your voice.
Amazing.
And I just watched it and I said, wow, I can imagine the crazy things that can happen. It was just a picture.
Just a picture. And you can do everything with it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, to what extent can international cooperation be achieved in AI governance, and what role should bodies like the UN or OECD or UNESCO play in setting global AI, or UNDP, play in setting global AI standards?
3 things, so we don't even waste time on that. The soft law structure would help. We need more principles from them, more guidelines from them. That's the role I actually was anticipating for AU, right? The module law, when I said the module law, we need that. We need that kind of soft law implementation, soft law guidelines. It makes it easier for, at the level of whether the world or the continental or regional level, for you to have something to hold on to. Because a lot of people tend to believe, and well, maybe this would be to the exclusion of the United States, but a lot of people tend to believe to the things that comes from the UN, and it's easier for them to look at it and say, oh, that's a UN model, we can work around it. So I think that the impact will come from the soft laws that they help us with. And then if they create taxonomies for us, shared taxonomies, when we say algorithmic audit, it has to mean the same thing across board. When we say bias, it has to mean the same thing across board. Exactly. And then technical standards. They can get us technical standards, we should be fine. Yeah, I see ISO, IEC. We need to look the vendors. Someone needs to motivate the vendors to come together and let's have some baselines that allows us to work within a certain direction. The protocols must be the same, or relatively the same. It is easier that way because when harms emanate, it would give us a signpost like, okay, this happened, oh, this is the potential, and then across the world, across the region, across the continent, it's way much easier to enforce. Yeah, so that's how I see them coming in.
So based on what you're saying, I mean, looking ahead, how might these varying regulatory landscapes impact innovation, cross-border collaboration, and the democratization of AI technology, especially in developing countries?
So innovation, it would increase trust.
Okay.
Right? Because we are doing literally the same thing. Like the framework is the same thing.
Okay.
It would also create a very good competitive environment because people would be working with the best standards. They're just not going to be in their corner, do something and throw it out there. We're talking about potential harms out of AI. We are not even talking about AI that is giving us weather forecasts. These are things we can live with. We're talking about AI that is determining who gets employment. AI. Exactly. So I think that would create some, and then also you can look at it from a democratization point of view, where nobody actually holds, apart from maybe intellectual property and some of the core trade secrets, nobody actually owns this is us. You get AI open up because the standards are there. It's like looking at open banking. The API is there. You know how the structure works, but it's now left to the specifics of your products. That's how we want to look at it if we are involving the international bodies, and if they are coming out with the soft laws, standardization and all that. It will reflect in showing that we can create better innovation, less mistrust in the solutions. We can democratize AI, and we can bring everybody on board. And for us as developing countries, that might be a bigger value for us because it means that our, what's the terminology? Our barrier of entry will now be lower, because then we know what the standards are and we can work with them. Apart from our own standards, we can also work with global standards. Yeah.
So Desmond, final bonus question. As a legal, a counselor, an expert in the space, what role should Texonnect be playing right now to ensure that our country, our continent is safe in this era, and ensure that we're sitting at the table making the right moves?
So the biggest will be your policy conversation. I don't think you should miss any policy conversation. Forgive me, but we also right. So now I think the biggest that would be part of your engagement would be to look at the policy conversations. You want to develop policy briefs. You want to analyze policy, scrutinize policy. You might not be a friend to government for now, because if you want things done right, then you would have to look at it from a much more, if you like, a heavier scrutiny perspective, critical perspective, which usually will not make you popular with governments. I say this because even in the US, certain papers that we wrote, it took time for the right people in the White House to even take the papers and look at them. But like I said, ultimately, some of these things are being implemented, and I think that would work. You can also influence, and I think I learned this in the US, you can influence how government receives policy. One of the biggest things I saw is what they call the RFI, request for information, where before government policy is placed out, it's not about calling stakeholders into some roundtable meeting. They actually open up and say, we're looking for RFIs on this subject matter. I personally wrote an AI paper on national security, which was submitted as part of RFIs, and I was not a US citizen. right? But the opportunity is there for experts to be able to make that input. And I think that it's also because of the kind of tech policy environment that they have, which I think Texonnect can bring on board. You can change the tech policy environment that we have. I don't think it even exists. You know, currently we are doing more of, government calls stakeholders and we have a conversation. A tech policy environment is way beyond that. Publishing our own papers, criticizing tech policy. We don't care whether it affects the government of the day or not. We just want the best for industry. You know, if you can become, or if Texonnect can become that independent, strong voice for technology, you become a source for government's own validation of its policy.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the biggest. Everything else is what everybody else does. Awareness creation, holding sessions like this and all that. But I think your biggest trump card is having the experts, you know, at your beck and call, and having a unified force, a unified conversation towards a national goal. And I think that would be an awesome thing to do. And I'm available for that.
Thank you very much. You heard the man, Desmond Israel. He's been on Texonnect Voices, and it's only going to get better. If you have any questions, or you're looking to follow up, or you're ready to take up arms and follow the revolution, just sign up, and we'll get you involved. Let's keep watching Texonnect Voices. Thank you for joining.